Okay, folks, welcome to this session on troubleshooting tips for VSAN. Thank you for coming here during lunchtime. I'm sure it's a very difficult thing to get away from all those nice corn chips you've been having. So this presentation has been created by two people. You've got Francis Daly and Javier Menendez. So can anyone guess which one I might be? I'm Javier. Close, so close. So it's 50-50 chance. So my name is Francis Daly, and what I do basically is I create training for our technical support staff at VMware. So the guys that do the troubleshooting, whenever you encounter an issue, I'm the person that creates deep dive troubleshooting for them. Okay. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about a few different things. Here's our disclaimer, we're not going to talk about that. But what we are going to talk about is a VSAN overview. We will take a look at the architecture, what some of the requirements are, and what some of the best practices are. Okay. Now there are lots of presentations where we talk about best practices here at VMworld. The angle today will be on what not to do. Okay. How not to break your environment. Okay. Using common sense. And I'm going to tie this back to real case scenarios, real issues that we have encountered in GSS, which is our technical support groups, right? We will then talk about VSAN troubleshooting tools. Which tools are really, really useful? Okay. So has anybody here got any favorite tools from a troubleshooting perspective? Let's start with this question. How many people here are using VSAN right now? Okay, that's good. So for those of you that are not using VSAN right now, there are many tools for troubleshooting. Okay? So when you want to go troubleshooting, we've got some really, really good new and improved troubleshooting tools. Okay? To name but a few, we've got ESXi, RVC, which is the Ruby vSphere console, and then we've got the Health UI. There are lots of other ones, but these are the ones we will cover today. Okay? So before we get started into the VSAN overview, I want to ask a question. How many of you guys have built a house yourselves? You built a house? Brilliant. Okay. So at least we have one person. I've never built a house myself, but I've seen people building houses. So have you ever seen someone build the frame for the house and say, we're going to put our windows here, 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 and here, and then just go onto eBay and choose any window without measuring the dimensions of that hole where the window should go? What do you think would happen if you did that? You're going to have lots of gaps. It's going to be pretty drafty, right? So the same goes for VSAN, right? VSAN is an extremely easy product to use. It's so easy to set up. However, you want to ensure that the hardware that you are using for VSAN is the correct hardware. So what we have is we have a tool called the VMware Compatibility Guide. Okay, so you can go on to VMware.com and you can look for the VMware Compatibility Guide, and it will tell you if your drives are supported on VSAN. It will actually tell you which tier would be better for those drives. So, for example, you can have your different classes of SSDs. It will tell you, and if you have different classes of SSDs, it will tell you where should they be in the cache tier, or should they be in the capacity tier? Okay, and we're going to talk about those tiers in a second. So if you're going to take one thing from this presentation today, it's the VMware Compatibility Guide. Okay, we will discuss it a little bit further in a minute. Okay, so a VSAN cluster. When you're setting up a VSAN cluster, there are a few things you need to ensure that you have, right? You can have between 2 nodes to 64 nodes. For a 2-node cluster, you still need a witness node, which can be a virtual machine if you want to have that, okay? We recommend, if you're not going with 2-node VSAN, I would recommend at least a minimum of 4 nodes. Can you have a 3-node cluster? Yes. Is it supported? Yes. What happens if one of your hosts dies and you have a failures to tolerate of 1 set? You're in trouble, okay? So if you're going to set up a VSAN cluster, if you're going to make an investment, then make a wise investment and have at least 4 nodes in that cluster. From your switch point of view, you can choose whatever type of switch you want, okay, from a vendor's perspective. If you have an all-flash cluster, then it needs to be at least a 10 gig switch. If you have a hybrid VSAN cluster, so meaning you're using SSDs and magnetic disks, you can use a 1 gig switch. But again, if you run into congestion issues, you're probably going to run into congestion issues at the switch layer. So we would recommend using a 10 gig switch at all times, okay? Then you have disk groups in your VSAN cluster, okay? So if you're participating storage to a VSAN data store, you're going to utilize disk groups, and you can have between 1 and 5 disk groups in your cluster. Within those disk groups, you can have one flash disk in that disk group, and up to 7 either SSDs or magnetic disks. So if you have an all-flash cluster, you're going to have 1 SSD in the cache tier, and the other guys are going to be in your capacity tier, where all of your components are going to be stored. Okay, so your components are stored on the capacity tier. Okay? So, as I said earlier, you want to ensure that everything you have in your VSAN cluster is supported. We need to, it's so important. It's our number 1 call driver. It's people calling in saying, I'm having issues, it's not performing as I expected, but guess what? If you buy a Ferrari and you put in an engine from an old beat-up Toyota, is it going to go fast enough? Is it going to drive like a Ferrari? It's not. And we get people calling in saying, I bought this fantastic host and I put in these disks. What type of disks did you put in? I put in these 10K disks. Oh, really? And you're having performance problems. And what kind of IOPS were you expecting? I was expecting 1 million IOPS. So why am I not getting that speed? Okay? You need to ensure that you manage your own expectations as well, and you have to be realistic about these things, okay? So here as well we see things about disks, controllers, firmwares and drivers. From your disks perspective, you want to ensure that you have the correct firmware and drivers on those disks. How many people have installed VSAN 6.6? In VSAN 6.6, it tells you all of this, right? You will get health check warnings where it says your firmware and drivers are not up to date. It needs to be patched. It will tell you all of the issues that are going on in your VSAN cluster. So in VSAN 6.6, it just makes life very, very easy for you. But for those of you that are on, we'll say 6.0, then what you need to do is you need to go and you need to run some commands. Have any of you heard of VMware Learning Zone? So if you type into Google VMware Learning Zone, there are videos where I will walk you through, where I have a PuTTY session onto an ESX server, and I will show you exactly step by step how to do all of this. You won't even need to look at documentation. You can just follow my video, and you get to see me again, right? So that's always going to be a good thing. So we spoke about network requirements and the disks. Also, what are objects? So from a vSAN perspective, what you are doing is you are utilizing object-based storage. Okay? So a virtual machine has its home directory, it has its disks. Each of those is an object. Okay? You've also got your swap, your delta disks, and your memory data, so in case you want to have in-memory snapshots. Now, the great thing about this is You know the way with traditional storage you're going to have your gold, your platinum, and you can set up your different performance requirements. Well, you can do this at an object level with vSAN. Okay? So you can say, I have a virtual machine, and let's say it has an Exchange database or whatever it is, right? And I want to have optimal performance for that VMDK. You can set a policy especially for that VMDK. It's the same for your home directory. What if you have a VM and you cannot afford to have any failures on that VM? Let's say you've got a 7-node cluster. You will set your failures to tolerate to 2. Say, if 2 hosts go down in this cluster, I need to ensure that I have access to data at all times. Let's talk about another real use case. So, GSS or tech support team call me one morning and they say, can you come help me with a red escalation? And I said, okay, I can come over. I can work with you guys, no problem. Who is this for? It's for a hospital. Oh, okay. So we know this is going to be serious straight away. So what happens is I get on the phone with the customer and he says, we had an outage last night. And when we brought back up our VSAN cluster, we've had some hardware issues. So how many people here have never had a hardware issue in their data center? Show of hands. You've never had a hardware issue?
I lie.
Yeah, it's good. I lie all the time as well. So,
I bought VMware, they said it never fails.
it will never fail. Nothing will ever fail. So, hardware is going to fail. It's what keeps us all in business, right? It happens. But you have to look at it this way. If hardware does fail, what do you do, right? So I spoke to this customer and I said, okay, I do believe that we are going to be able to get a lot of your data back, but how many virtual machines can you not access data to right now? He said 10. I said, okay. Can you tell me the priority of these virtual machines? And one of them was for the operating theatre. And I said, okay, well, we're going to start with the operating theatre. That's the guy we're going to get back up first. And I said, you know the whole get out of jail free card? I had to say to him, okay, in the event we cannot resolve this issue, when was your last backup of the operating theatre? And this is no lie, the phone just went quiet. And I just went, oh no, please. And it had been 3 weeks since he had run his last backup. And that was for the operating theatre, right? And the other problem was with some of his other ones for medical records and stuff like that, he had backups, but he had not tested his backups. So there's no point in having backups if you don't test them. So does that make sense? And I know that might not be very specific to vSAN, but anything you have, it doesn't matter if you have a different storage vendor. I'm a technical person. Nobody wants to get in trouble for not having backups. So please ensure that you have backups. So here we have an example of what happens when you create a virtual machine. Okay? So I've got a virtual machine here, and I don't know if you can see that, but it's 200 gigs in size, and I have a failures to tolerate of 1. Okay? So what happens when I create a 200 gig virtual machine, 200 gig VMDK, is a 200 gig component is created here. Another 200 gig component is created here, and there's a witness, okay? And that's used in the event of a tiebreaker, okay? And what happens if this host over here on the left dies? Can we still access our data? Yes, we can, okay? Because we've got a good copy, right? So it's like DNA replication, okay? It's going to copy the data to another host once you have enough resources. So just like we spoke about a while ago, in the event of one of the hosts dying here, it cannot actually copy it anywhere else. we need to have another host. That's why I was saying have a minimum of 4 hosts. Okay? It makes more sense. So here's what that actually looks like when we're in the UI. Okay? So here's my keeper VM, just like I said a while ago. And we can see here that I've got my VMDK. And how has it been spread out? I've got 2 components on host 1 and host 2. And I've got my witness on host 4. Okay? So if you want to determine how many hosts you would need, so if you've got a mission critical virtual machine, okay, and you say, I can't afford failures on that, there's a formula that will tell you how many hosts you will actually need in your environment if one of them were to fail. So it's 2n plus 1. So in this we set a failures to tolerate of 1. So 2 times 1 plus 1 is 3. Okay? So if you want a failures to tolerate of 2, 2 times 2 plus 1 is 5. We all know maths, right? I don't need to go into this anymore. Good. So we have different component states as well. So you've got active. Active means we're all happy. So when you come along and you see active, you know everything is good. Okay? And actually, if we look back at that last diagram, you can see down here, all my components are active. So we're good from that perspective. So active is good, absent. So what happens is when a component goes absent, so maybe a network cable could have been plugged from a host. So if you unplug your network cable from your host, it's going to go absent because VSAN can't see it anymore. Okay? Now, what it will do is, or maybe you put a host in maintenance mode, it will go absent. Okay? And what it will do is it will wait 60 minutes. And the reason it waits 60 minutes is because maybe you're performing maintenance. Okay? But if you get a hard failure, what it will do is it will start to rebuild the data onto another host as long as you have those resources. It will rebuild that data onto another disk group. Okay? So just like DNA replication, we've got everything here. I need an exact copy and it's going to copy it. It's the same here, it's going to copy it straight across. So if if you get a disk and a disk dies and it knows, okay, I'm getting some permanent failures here, just like a PDL, what happens? It starts rebuilding those components straight away. Make sense? And then we've got stale for if we need to update anything. So some of the tools that you can use, we've got VROps. I'm sure people have heard of VROps. We've also got ESXi, RVC, Health Check, VSAN Observer. Now, VSAN Observer is good for performance troubleshooting if you're really deep diving, but the performance service inside the vSphere UI is actually really, really good. It's more basic. It talks about latency, bandwidth, and in my opinion, it just makes it a lot easier to troubleshoot from a basic point of view. So let's talk about some of these, okay? So what we're going to talk about first is ESXi. For those of you, for those of you that are using VSAN at the moment, what versions of VSAN are you using? So you guys were saying you're at 6, okay. So to upgrade to, we'll say, VSAN 6.6, there's a non-disk format upgrade, okay? There's really good documentation around upgrades at the moment, so you can get upgrade documentation, and I would highly recommend looking at, your upgrade paths and stuff like that before you go kicking off an upgrade, because you do have to do an on-format disk upgrade, which means that you need to migrate everything off of that host, then we need to do the disk format upgrade, then push it back on, so you've got some sinks going on, and you're going to have some performance degradation because of that. But we all know that's a necessary evil, okay? But for VSAN 6.6, the improvements that are there, it's amazing, and I genuinely mean that. You've got VSAN encryption. Like at 6.2, we were after bringing in deduplication and compression. So you've got a lot of new features. But from a troubleshooting point of view, ESXi has become such a useful troubleshooting tool. You can do so much more in ESXi that you used to be able to do. So for those of you that are on 6.0, when you go back, run ESXi VSAN, and you will see that you don't have as many of these new features from a troubleshooting point of view. So as you can see here, there are ones like debug, health, resync. So all of these are really useful from a troubleshooting point of view. So here what I've done is I've run an ESXi VSAN health cluster list. Okay? And after running that, what you can see is I've highlighted one of the tests that is showing in yellow. So it's like the traffic light system. Okay, we're not in too much trouble. This one is probably okay, and you can proceed, but it's still a yellow warning. You can see at the top of the screen there is ones that are in red. If you have something in red, you will always address that first, okay? However, what we're going to do is we're just going to look at that yellow one first from inside an ESXi. And as you can see here, you've got VSAN Cluster Get. The name of the test was VSAN Disk Balance. And as you can see here, we've got rebalance state, and it says proactive rebalance is needed. So that means that you can kick off a proactive rebalance yourself if you want to perform that resync yourself. Or you can wait for VSAN to do it. So what you've got underneath the covers is a thing called CLOM. And that's the Cluster Level Object Manager. And it's like the architect on a building site, okay? He's the guy that's looking at everything saying, okay, where are my resources? What do I need? And do we need to rebalance? Do we need to move workers to different locations? So it's kind of like that, okay? So here then is the ones for, it's VSAN Object Health. This was the one that was showing in red. The ones that are showing in red, we know we're in trouble. What do you see on that screen that would make you worried? If you typed that in at home, 2 inaccessible objects. So we can't access the data. Okay? So straight away, we've only typed in 2 commands, and we know we can actually see the IDs of those objects that are inaccessible. We can't access our data. Things have just got real here, and we need to resolve this now. Okay? So what do? We can go in and we can use VSAN debug command. And just a question for you guys. Why would I be using ESXi in this situation? Why wouldn't I be using RVC, or why wouldn't I be inside using, the web client like usual? So I'm interacting directly with the host. But if your VC died, if VC was dead, how are you going to troubleshoot it then? Right? So you can come in here, and if VC is dead, you've got all of this information. Okay? So that's why we would use this. This is a typical way that we would troubleshoot when we get, my VC is dead, can you please help me? Okay? So we've got different options here in VSAN debug. We've got disk, object, resync, controller, limit, and VMDK. I'm not going to go through every one of these because I want to make sure that nobody falls asleep either, okay? So you can run all of these in your own environment when you get to VSAN 6.6. But you can do a resync summary, okay? And you can see how much resyncs are going on in your environment. Couple of things that you should not do when a resync is happening. So if you decided you wanted to maybe put a host in maintenance mode for any reason, go in here and run this command first. Because if a resync is happening, it could be resyncing to the disk groups on this host. You don't want that to happen. Okay? So give that a check. If you decided you were going to decommission disks for any reason, this is one of the commands you would run. Okay? We can see our object health summary. That's another quick way of looking at what's happening as well in your environment. So here, yep.
If the team responsible for patching decide they're going to go ahead and do the VMware updates and they were to bounce a host using updates, puts the host in maintenance, and this was going on, that would stop that process, right?
So it would stop the resync. It would stop the resync. It's not going to try and continue to resync to a host that's going into maintenance mode.
Practice, but if
yes.
you have the guy at 2 o'clock in the morning not paying attention and he's on his way,
so we've got our from a failures to tolerate point of view, it will actually calculate how much more it actually has to resync, and it would probably, well, what it should do is resync to another host. So it would still probably continue with that resync if that resync was necessary. In here we can see that object that I was talking about, I can go and I can check the state of that object. So here is the object, and we can see our components, and we've got 3 components in an absent state. Okay? Can anybody remember what I said what absent meant? We can't see the host. Can anybody take a guess what might have happened here? If we can't see any of our hosts, what do all of our hosts usually connect to? To the network? Okay, so it's a network issue, because the likelihood of 3 different hosts going down is very unlikely, okay? Also in here, you can do things like VSAN debug list and check the congestion. If you had any congestion issues, you would check them in there, okay? Also, remember earlier I was talking about disks, and I was talking about the difference between, you know, with a Ferrari and an old beat up, if you really, you know, beat up Toyota, which I have, okay? Great car. But, so, if you look at it, we've got VSAN debug controller list. If you buy the best disks in the world, the fastest disks that you can get, and all of a sudden you've got congestion problems, you've got latency, what's going on? How can that actually happen? Well, it's probably because of your controller. You need to ensure that you have a controller that can support those disks, that has a large enough queue depth, and that's the main thing to look at here. You see the maximum supported queue depth at the bottom? It's like 891. That's a good queue depth, okay? Sometimes we get people calling in and they have a controller and they're after buying fantastic disks, and their controller, it just basically can't support those disks, okay? So here we can see debug limits. So for example, if you couldn't create a virtual machine or something like that, maybe you've reached your component limit. It would be very hard to reach your component limit. You would have to create so many VMs with loads of small VMDKs before you would reach that component limit. And here you can take a look at your actual disks, look at their health, the path to the disks, see what's going on from that perspective. We're going to take a quick look at RVC. From RVC, so now our VC is back up, okay? And we can access everything. Here we can do our VSAN check state, and it tells me straight away I've got 2 inaccessible objects, and it tells me which host they're actually sitting on. So I just ran a VSAN check state, and that 0 is that's the name of the cluster, okay? In here I can look at my disk stats. So here's the host, here's the name, we've got my SSDs, it highlights which disks are SSDs. I've got my number of components. If you look at the number of components, why does it look like the components are always sitting on my magnetic disks? Anybody want to take a guess? Except, no, you can't. Yeah, so they're capacity disks. So your components are going to sit at the capacity layer, okay? So the cached here can take care of everything from a speed perspective, okay? Also, we've got our capacity total. We can see our used space and all of that other good stuff. Over here on the right is your status health. We can see everything is okay. You see that V5? That's your disk version, okay? So you want to have that as high as possible, so you're getting the benefits of checksum and all the other great features that are there for VSAN 6.6. So this is for VSAN 6.6. You can also run cluster info and take an overall look at your cluster. So in your cluster you've got a master, backup, and you've got agent nodes, okay? And here it will tell you your cluster role for this host. We can see he's a backup, and we can see also information about the SSDs and the magnetic disks, what versions they are. The health UI. If you want life to be nice and easy for you, use the health UI, okay? It basically tells you this is what's wrong in your cluster and this is how you fix it, okay? It couldn't really make it much easier for you, and that's honestly the truth. So what we see here is we've got a lot of tests. There are a lot more than this, okay? And what we see here is I've selected cluster, and here we can see I've chosen disk balance, and it tells me proactive rebalances required. So the thing here is I can actually kick off the proactive rebalance. I couldn't do that earlier inside an ESXi, okay? So that's the VSAN disk balance. Here's the disk usage. And in here, we can see proactive rebalance is needed. And up here on the right, we've got Ask VMware. So what it does is, we click on Ask VMware, it pulls up a knowledge base article telling you exactly what's wrong. And this is what we need to do to resolve it. So it pulls up a KB for you. Okay? After the rebalance, we can see down at the bottom, there's no rebalance required. Okay? That tool is also available to you. You can go onto your VC and you can run the VSAN Health on the VC, and you can now also run it natively on the ESX server. Before you go gathering logs, you can go and you can grep for any issues that are happening. So just some other places that you can learn more about VSAN and many other courses is you can take a look. First of all, you can meet any of us guys here and we can talk to you more about it. We're happy to talk about anything you want to talk about. You can also take certifications. If any of you want to take certifications, please go to Jasmine on level 3. You can take the classroom-led training. So we've got a VSAN 6.6, and you can also take on-demand training. You can also take a look at the VMware Learning Zone, where there are videos there. So just like I talked about a while ago, you can see a lot of videos in the VMware Learning Zone, which can be really useful. And has anybody tried taking the VSAN Specialist exam yet? So you can take it here. We've got discounts this week for those exams as well. And I wrote questions for the exam, so if anybody wants any advice on what you need to know beforehand, please let me know. Not you. Yeah, and you get a nice shirt that says VSAN Specialist on it as well. So then everybody's going to love you, right? There's also the digital badges, so you can take it for VxRail as well. Okay? So guys, thank you for coming right in the middle of your lunch. And if anybody has any questions, please come up and we'll be very happy to answer any questions that you have. Don't forget to fill out the survey and please come up for any questions that you have. Thanks guys.